Welcome back, and thanks again for joining us for another episode as we continue to study through the Word of God together. We're grateful you're with us and hope the next few minutes will be a help to you as we continue our study through the book of Judges. We are going to jump into the book of Judges, chapter 16 today, as we're currently walking through one of the more well-known judges, and that is a man by the name of Samson. And we're just going to do something different in our Old Testament studies. It's rare. We're just going to look at just 3 verses today. 3 verses about a situation that, while a lot of times we focus our attention on how Samson got out of this situation, I want to also put a little bit of our attention into how Samson got himself into this situation and how we can learn some great principles from that. So again, Judges chapter number 16. And we're going to look down in verse number 1. It says this: Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute and went into her. The Gazites were told, Samson has come here. And they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait until the light of the morning, then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. Now, I said a moment ago, generally speaking, if you're walking through the life of Samson and all the different biblical depictions of what took place in that, usually we focus our attention in verse 3, right? How Samson got out of this situation. We talk about the fact that Samson was being surrounded by people, that people wanted to kill him, and that, so what does he do? He shows again his great strength, his supernatural strength. So he goes out, instead of hiding, instead of jumping a wall, instead of getting out, what does he do? He goes out and he tears down the entire gate, ripping the posts and everything off. Now let's talk, before we go back to kind of the premise we're going to, let's take a minute and examine really what just takes place here. So Samson shows immense strength. You have to understand, in a lot of occasions in these type of gates, they would talk about that it often took more than one person to even open or close them. I mean, these were immense gates in this day and age, and so you've got him carrying them with the posts and with everything, and he doesn't just toss them aside to leave. He picks them up on his shoulder and he carries them up a hill. I mean, so the more you hear the story, the more you recognize the absolute incredible strength that was given to Samson in his life to fulfill God's purpose. But then he walks him all the way up to a hill outside of Hebron. And why in the world would he do that? Because if he were just to take the one, showing his strength, showing that they really had no power over him, but if he just taken the gate in the posts and everything and just dropped them off to the side, yes, it would have taken some time to rebuild it. Because you have to understand that one of the things he does to his enemy is he says by eliminating the gate, he eliminates a major part of security for the Philistine people. You understand, these gates, they were the enclosure part of a walled city that was protecting them from being attacked by the enemy, from animals getting in, from evil people getting in, and just plundering the city. It was the last step. It was where all the security was to protect the city. So basically Samson comes out by tearing it out, if you could put it this way, basically says you really aren't as safe as you think you are. God can do whatever he wants in the situation. But the other side is, not only did he not just lay the gates to the side where it might have taken him time to rebuild them, but he could have. He moved them so far away. Think about how many people it would have taken to bring those gates back. So he just makes the situation so much worse. And some of this you can see is God showing his power. Some of this is just Samson living. One of the things you will see in this story and others, that one of Samson's greatest weaknesses was his arrogance. The fact that because he was who he was, in his mind, he could have whatever he wanted, and there was really nobody to stop him. We have mentioned this many times through the book of Judges, and it bears repeating in this situation. We're grateful that God uses broken people. God uses flawed people. We're glad he does it because he uses us, flawed people. But in every situation, we do get to see the weaknesses of the people. And boy, there was an arrogance and cockiness, which makes sense. He was basically Superman, if you really want to put it that way, not to an extent, but really a supernatural, the first superhuman. Really, we talk about it on TV and comic strips and stuff today, but in reality, this was real. This happened. And so he's showing supernatural strength as a way to show that there's nothing, in his mind, there's nothing his enemy can do against him. And please understand, it is this same arrogance in just a short period of time is going to put him in one of the most humbling places he could be shortly before his death. So you see that. But I want to get to that point because it takes us back to the first couple of verses. in this situation. So we see how he gets out. We see the supernatural strength. We see that no matter what situation he finds himself in, God always makes a way to escape. The Bible says there's no temptation taking us but what is common to man, but God is able. God is gracious to find a way, to help us find a way to escape that we can bear it, that we can get out of the temptation. There's always a way to escape. But in this situation, we see Samson put himself in a compromising situation. So he comes down and he finds a prostitute. That was just as wrong in the book of Judges as it is today. Now, I know that probably from the legal perspective in those days, in the Philistine town, it probably wasn't, but it definitely was in God's law. Intimacy was still supposed to be between a man and a woman, one man, one woman married. That was the design from the beginning. It's always been God's design, and it's still God's design. And it's definitely what he was supposed to follow, especially a judge, especially a man who's been set apart by God to be used to lead these people back to God. So he puts himself in a situation he should have never been in, and yet he felt as though he had a right to be there, or else why would he go there? So he feels like even though he's right in the middle of Philistines, they can't hurt him. He's in a spot where he's not supposed to be. He didn't really wasn't respecting God and his laws. And I know we can quick to say how bad. And I think, we'd say, well, I don't know, I've never done something as bad as what Samson's doing in this situation, which hopefully is true. But that doesn't change the fact that we got to be very careful to compare. We look and say, well, I've never been as bad as that. And then what we do is we downgrade sin. We've got to be very careful that sin is sin. And we might not have done that. And we can always find somebody who has sinned worse than us. But please understand, it's not those sins worse than ours that placed Jesus on the cross. It was all of our sin, and if I had sin in just what we consider a small matter, that still would have placed Jesus on the cross. He had to pay the punishment for sin. And so please, we look at that. We got to see that all of us can find ourselves in that situation. And the simple principle is, no matter how strong you might be, or how strong you believe you are, you can find yourself, if you're not careful, in tempting and difficult situations. There is a part where we need to use wisdom, we need to use guidance, and we need to be careful to recognize that if we think that we can handle this, is probably the one time we know we can't. The Bible says, let not a man think he stand, take heed lest he fall. Be so careful to not conclude in your mind that you are strong enough. Now, I can play with this. I can do this. I can look a little bit. I can play, whatever it is. I can jump a little bit into it. I can handle this. The fact is you cannot. The moment you think you can is the time that you are of greatest weakness, because it's your pride, and pride comes before destruction, right? So pride is the thing that brings you down. And the moment you think you can look at a temptation, you can look at a sin and say, I can play with it, I can do it, no big deal, it won't hurt me or whatever, that is at the moment you are at your weakest. So I challenge you to recognize that. Looking at something and saying, I'm strong enough, is actually proof you are not. Samson, the strongest man to have lived, at least in that time that we know of, from a human standpoint, without a doubt, definitely thought he could physically handle it. And he proved that he could walk away from his enemy without really worrying about it. But we're looking at a spiritual strength here, and yet he walks into a situation he should not have been there. Arrogance, thinking he could be there. The other principle we can see there is, even in those as strong as you might be, when you put yourself and you follow into temptation, you can put yourself into compromising situations. While Samson was able to get out of this situation with his physical strength, he was in a compromising situation. He was completely surrounded by people who wanted him dead. And frankly, his ultimate purpose of being alive was to fulfill this problem, this grief to the Philistine people, and ultimately free the Philistine people, or free the Jewish people from the Philistine captivity. Him being killed in that situation would have eliminated the purpose for which God brought him. Now, in his mind, he could have thought, what? God's not done with me, all those things. Well, he might have thought that, and a few episodes later, we'll see how that thought put him to his death. So we look at this and we say, he got through it, he got away with it. He did this time, but not maybe next time. We've got to be very, very careful. We go back what we said a few episodes ago with Samson. We can learn that he got what he wanted, but he lost what he had. That's ultimately Delilah. But we can see the mindset behind that. And boy, may we learn from Samson. Samson ultimately did great things and was used from God to exactly what God wanted to do. But we'll see that his life was shortened because of it. While God still used Samson, Samson judged for 20 years, he could have judged longer. He could have lived a full life. His life was cut short. As we'll see here shortly, his life was cut short as a result of his arrogance and unwilling to submit to God. It could have been better. It could have been longer. And yes, while God's grace is still there, we want the most we can get from God. We don't want to live this conflicting life, right? Where, well, God can still use me, but there's all this conflict in between. We want to do our best to not put ourselves in these situations where we add grief, we add drama, we add struggle, we add guilt, and all that can come with it. So the key is that we don't allow ourselves to be put in a situation. Whether or not we believe we can handle it is not the case. It doesn't matter. It's not the point. The point is in obedience to God, submission to God, and then we get the most fulfillment from what God's plan for our life is. And we can use this, not that God is using us in spite of us. God can use us in the midst of what we want to do, and he can still use us as a submitted servant to him. Well, I greatly appreciate the privilege you give to me to be part of your day. I hope you stick with us as we will continue to work through the life of Samson and then finish up the book of Judges. Again, thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next time.